Alan Turing was born on June 23, 1912 in Maida Vale, London, into a family tied to the British colonial service in India. His father, Julius Matheson Turing, served in the Indian Civil Service, while his mother, Ethel Sarah Turing, née Stoney, was the daughter of a railway engineer in Madras. Because of his parents' duties overseas, Turing spent much of his childhood in England, raised by family friends who allowed him to explore his curiosity. From an early age, he displayed an intense fascination with patterns, numbers, and the hidden rules behind nature. He learned to read astonishingly quickly, progressing from children's stories to advanced science books before most children mastered basic grammar. Turing enjoyed solitary pursuits, long walks to collect plants, careful observations of wildlife, and the construction of makeshift chemical experiments in the kitchen. At St. Michael's Preparatory School, his unusual talents were noticed by a supportive headmistress who encouraged his independent learning, even as the curriculum emphasized classical studies. In 1926, he entered Sherborne School, a prestigious institution where the rigid focus on Latin and literature clashed with his passion for mathematics and science. When a general strike closed public transport on his first day, Turing cycled more than 60 miles to attend, arriving mud-splattered but cheerful. This feat, remarkable for a boy of 13, became an enduring symbol of his persistence. Obstacles were simply problems to solve through determination, ingenuity, and effort. Teachers at Sherborne quickly recognized his brilliance in certain areas, yet criticized his unwillingness to conform to conventional study habits. He often ignored homework instructions to instead solve more complex problems of his own choosing, filling pages with intricate equations and speculative theories. His classmates sometimes found him odd, though not unfriendly. At Sherborne, Turing's unconventional approach to learning became more pronounced. While other students dutifully memorized Latin grammar or historical dates, he preferred to explore abstract mathematical problems, sometimes inventing his own notation systems. His teachers admired his quick mind but warned that his disregard for traditional subjects might jeopardize his academic future. In truth, this detachment from rote learning reflected his deeper philosophy. Knowledge should be pursued for its own sake, not merely to satisfy examination criteria. He was known to spend hours absorbed in mathematics books far beyond his syllabus, working through problems from Cambridge entrance papers or experimenting with prime numbers and their properties. His fascination with patterns extended beyond numbers. He observed that nature itself seemed governed by rules waiting to be discovered, from the spirals of sunflower seeds to the branching of trees. Outside academics, Turing was physically active, enjoying long-distance running, swimming, and cycling, finding in these pursuits a rhythm that mirrored his mental problem-solving processes. His growing interest in science was further fueled by contact with like-minded peers, though such friendships were rare in a school dominated by classical priorities. One particularly formative relationship was with Christopher Morcom, a fellow student who shared his enthusiasm for mathematics and physics. Together, they spent countless hours discussing astronomy, quantum theory, and the philosophical implications of scientific discovery. Turing later credited Morcom with inspiring him to think more deeply about the nature of the universe and the limits of human understanding. Their friendship was cut tragically short when Morcom died in 1930 from complications related to bovine tuberculosis, contracted from contaminated milk years earlier. After the death of Christopher Morcom, Turing's final years at Sherborne were marked by both academic distinction and emotional isolation. He threw himself into studies, excelling in mathematics and science, while continuing to perform only adequately in classical subjects. Teachers noted a quiet maturity emerging in his work, with essays that increasingly demonstrated original reasoning rather than repetition of accepted views. His grief over Morcom's loss transformed into a driving force, compelling him to pursue the questions they had once debated. Could the human mind be explained in purely physical terms? Were the processes of thought reducible to rules, or was there an element that transcended material explanation? These inquiries, though abstract for a schoolboy, would later form the foundation of his most significant scientific achievements. By 1931, Turing had earned a place at King's College, University of Cambridge, to study mathematics. This represented not merely an academic advancement, but liberation from the constraints of a school system that had never fully accommodated his intellectual style. At Cambridge, he entered an environment where originality was valued as highly as correctness, and he quickly distinguished himself among peers who were themselves highly talented. His early undergraduate work focused on probability theory and the mechanics of quantum physics, reflecting the influence of contemporary scientific debates. Freed from the rigid confines of Sherborne, he began to develop the disciplined yet imaginative thinking that would define his later career. Cambridge also offered Turing a rich intellectual community, exposing him to lectures from leading figures in mathematics and philosophy. He joined the university's rowing club, enjoyed running in the countryside, and participated in informal debates about logic and the nature of computation, though at the time, such ideas were more philosophical than technical. At King's College, Turing quickly established himself as a rising academic talent. His natural aptitude for abstract reasoning allowed him to engage with complex mathematical theories that many of his peers found daunting. By his second year, he was deeply involved in the study of probability, logic, and number theory, finding connections between disciplines that were not obvious to others. His approach often blended rigorous deduction with imaginative leaps, allowing him to bypass traditional step-by-step methods and arrive at elegant solutions. In 1934, his exceptional work earned him a first-class honors degree, and shortly afterward, he was elected a Fellow of King's College, a rare honor for someone so young. This appointment gave him the freedom to pursue independent research, and it was during this period that he began considering the limits of mathematics itself. Inspired by Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorems, Turing started to wonder whether there could be a universal method for deciding the truth or falsity of any mathematical statement. This question, known as the Entscheidungsproblem or decision problem, had already captured the attention of leading logicians in Europe. While most scholars approached it through symbolic logic alone, Turing considered a different angle, imagining an abstract machine that could, in theory, simulate the logical steps a human mathematician might take. This conceptual leap would prove transformative, but in the early 1930s, it was still just taking shape in his mind. His colleagues sometimes struggled to follow his reasoning, not because it was obscure, but because it was several steps ahead of conventional thinking. Turing possessed an unusual patience for exploring hypothetical constructs, building layer upon layer of abstraction until a coherent structure emerged. At the same time, he maintained a playful side, enjoying practical jokes and whimsical thought experiments that masked the intensity of his intellectual labor. Alan Turing's work at the University of Manchester from 1948 onward marked a shift from pure theory to the tangible challenges of building intelligent systems. He was tasked with programming the Manchester Mark I, one of the first stored program computers. This was no small leap. Unlike the conceptual Turing machine, the Mark I was a massive physical apparatus with its own quirks, slow speeds, and limited memory. Yet Turing approached it with the same curiosity he had brought to mathematics and wartime cryptography. He sought to apply logical principles directly to machine operations, exploring how to encode instructions that allowed the system to respond to changing inputs. He even designed one of the earliest chess-playing programs, despite the hardware being far too slow to execute it effectively at the time. This was not a novelty project for him. Chess provided a microcosm for reasoning under constraints, decision-making, and strategic planning, skills that any true artificial intelligence would need. Turing documented his ideas in ways that revealed his forward-thinking approach. He envisioned machines that could improve at such tasks through repeated play, analyzing their mistakes and learning from them. This idea, decades before machine learning became a formal field, underscored his conviction that intelligence, human or artificial, was fundamentally adaptive. Even as colleagues questioned whether these pursuits had practical value, Turing persisted, believing the exercise of teaching machines to solve problems was itself an experiment in understanding how thought works. Turing's curiosity was not confined to digital intelligence. In the early 1950s, he turned to an entirely different problem: morphogenesis, the process by which biological patterns, like the spots on a leopard or the spiral of a sunflower, emerge from apparently uniform beginnings. In his 1952 paper, The Chemical Basis of Morphogenesis, Turing proposed mathematical models describing how interacting chemicals, diffusing through space at different rates, could spontaneously form stable patterns. These reaction diffusion equations, initially a departure from his computing work, shared a deep conceptual kinship with his earlier ideas. Both involved simple rules giving rise to complexity. Turing recognized that the principles governing computation and biological development were not separate domains, but different expressions of a universal pattern generation mechanism. His morphogenesis research has since influenced fields as diverse as developmental biology, ecology, and even computer graphics, where similar algorithms are used to simulate natural textures. At the time, however, his work was largely ignored by biologists, partly because it was so ahead of its time and partly because his primary reputation was as a mathematician and cryptanalyst. Yet Turing himself saw no rigid boundaries between disciplines. He believed that to understand intelligence fully, one had to appreciate the broader phenomenon of structure and form emerging from underlying processes, whether those processes operated in the circuitry of a computer or the tissue of a living organism. This openness to crossing intellectual frontiers was a hallmark of his thinking and a reason why his influence spans multiple sciences today. Turing's approach to artificial intelligence was never confined to engineering. It was deeply philosophical. In his writings, he anticipated debates that dominate AI ethics today, questions about autonomy, creativity, and moral responsibility. He challenged the assumption that machines could only mimic thought without truly understanding, arguing that this distinction often hinged on arbitrary definitions. To Turing, the real measure of intelligence lay in the capacity to engage meaningfully with the world and adapt to new challenges, not in replicating human biology. He openly considered whether a sufficiently advanced machine might deserve ethical consideration, hinting at the idea of machine rights decades before it entered serious discourse. This foresight is striking in an era when AI was largely hypothetical. He also confronted the argument from consciousness, which claimed that no machine could think because it lacked subjective experience. Turing sidestepped the problem by noting that we can never directly verify another human's consciousness either. We infer it from behavior. By reframing the debate in functional rather than metaphysical terms, he shifted the focus to what machines could demonstrably do. This behavioral lens remains embedded in AI research, especially in areas like reinforcement learning and robotics. Turing's ethical musings were not abstract diversions, but integral to his vision. Building intelligent systems was not merely a technical challenge, but a societal one. His willingness to ask uncomfortable questions about both capabilities and consequences marks him as not just the father of computer science, but one of the earliest thinkers in AI ethics. Despite his intellectual achievements, Turing's life in early 1950s Britain was overshadowed by the country's harsh laws against homosexuality. In 1952, he was prosecuted for gross indecency after admitting to a consensual relationship with another man. Faced with imprisonment, he accepted chemical castration via hormonal treatment, a devastating decision forced upon him by the legal system. The punishment not only caused physical changes but also subjected him to social stigma, stripping him of his security clearance and severely limiting his professional opportunities. The irony was tragic. The man whose work had helped end the war and save millions of lives was now being punished by the very government he had served. This period was marked by isolation, yet Turing continued to work privately on mathematical problems and his morphogenesis research. Those close to him later described his resilience, noting that he never lost his curiosity, even when his world contracted. However, the psychological toll was undeniable. His treatment by the state became a symbol of the destructive power of prejudice, especially when it targets those whose contributions are immeasurable. Decades later, as society's views on sexuality evolved, Turing's story would become a rallying point for advocates of LGBTQ+ rights. But in the moment, it was a deeply personal tragedy, cutting short not only his public career, but possibly entire avenues of discovery. His experience remains a sobering reminder that scientific progress can be undone by social injustice if societies fail to protect their most creative minds. On June 7, 1954, Alan Turing was found dead in his home, with an inquest ruling it suicide by cyanide poisoning. He was just 41 years old. The circumstances, combined with a half-eaten apple at his bedside, fueled speculation and symbolic interpretations, with some later linking the image to the logo of Apple Incorporated, though this connection remains apocryphal. At the time, public awareness of his wartime contributions was minimal. His work at Bletchley Park remained classified, and his theoretical achievements were known only to specialists. The immediate response to his death was muted, reflecting both the secrecy surrounding his career and the stigma attached to his personal life. Only in later decades, as wartime archives were declassified, would the magnitude of his impact become widely recognized. The combination of groundbreaking intellect, personal tragedy, and posthumous discovery of his contributions created a compelling, if bittersweet, narrative. Turing's untimely death robbed the world of a mind still brimming with untested ideas. It also delayed recognition of how far ahead he had been in anticipating the digital age. The silence that followed his passing is as telling as the later acclaim. It reveals how societal prejudice can bury the legacy of even the most extraordinary innovators. In the years immediately following, there was no national mourning, no public debate, just an absence, into which his ideas quietly continued to echo among the few who understood their significance. Those echoes would eventually grow into the global acknowledgement we see today. The gradual declassification of wartime records in the 1970s transformed public understanding of Turing's importance. Historians and former colleagues began to reveal the scale of his role in breaking the Enigma code, estimating that his work may have shortened the war in Europe by as much as 2 years. The sheer mathematical brilliance and engineering creativity he brought to Bletchley Park astonished a new generation of computer scientists. As the computer revolution accelerated, Turing's earlier theoretical papers, once niche, suddenly read like prophetic blueprints. Universities began teaching the Turing machine as a foundational concept in computation, while philosophers of mind revisited his writings on artificial intelligence. The rediscovery was not merely academic, it was also cultural. Turing emerged as a posthumous hero, a figure embodying both the triumph of intellect and the tragedy of intolerance. This reappraisal fed into broader social changes, as LGBTQ+ activists and allies cited his treatment as emblematic of the injustice faced by countless others. Documentaries, biographies, and scholarly conferences proliferated, each reframing his life within the context of both scientific history and human rights. What had once been a story whispered in specialist circles became a matter of national, and eventually international, pride. The belated recognition carried a bittersweet edge. While it restored his place in history, it could not undo the personal harm he had suffered. Still, the rediscovery of Turing's work helped cement his dual legacy as both a pioneer of modern computing and a cautionary tale about the cost of prejudice. In the early 21st century, campaigns to formally acknowledge and apologize for Turing's treatment gained momentum. In 2009, then, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued an official apology on behalf of the government, describing his treatment as utterly unfair and recognizing his contributions to the war effort. In 2013, Queen Elizabeth II granted Turing a posthumous royal pardon, a symbolic act that sparked debate about whether pardons should be extended to all those convicted under similar laws. Eventually, the so-called Alan Turing law was introduced, offering pardons to thousands of men historically convicted under outdated anti-homosexuality legislation. Beyond the legal sphere, Turing's face began appearing on murals, statues, and commemorative plaques, transforming him into a cultural icon. In 2019, the Bank of England announced that Turing would appear on the £50 note, cementing his place alongside the most celebrated figures in British history. Each of these recognitions served a dual purpose: to honor his unparalleled intellectual contributions and to confront the injustice he endured. They also reinforced the lesson that a society's treatment of its most gifted members can define its moral as well as its scientific legacy. By turning Turing into a symbol of both innovation and resilience, Britain and the wider world began to integrate his story into a shared cultural narrative. This shift was more than symbolic. It influenced how future generations would view the relationship between science, ethics, and human dignity. The practical and theoretical frameworks Turing developed continue to underpin vast areas of modern computing. His conceptualization of the universal machine informs everything from programming language design to computational complexity theory. In AI, his emphasis on adaptive learning prefigured developments in neural networks, evolutionary algorithms, and natural language processing. Even the Turing test, while debated and refined, remains a touchstone in evaluating conversational AI. His morphogenesis models have found applications in computer graphics, materials science, and synthetic biology, illustrating the breadth of his influence. Turing's insistence on connecting abstract theory with practical experimentation resonates strongly in today's interdisciplinary research culture. By bridging mathematics, engineering, and philosophy, he helped establish a mode of thinking that encourages collaboration across fields, an approach now vital in tackling complex problems like climate modeling, cybersecurity, and medical AI. His work also serves as a reminder that computational systems are not neutral. They embody the goals, assumptions, and ethics of their creators. This insight has gained urgency in the age of large-scale data and machine learning, where biases in design can have global consequences. In this way, Turing's legacy is not just a historical curiosity, but a living framework guiding how we build, assess, and regulate intelligent systems in the 21st century. That long before AI reached its current sophistication, Turing contemplated but he also foresaw the ethical weight of such a shift. If a machine could convincingly reason, converse, and learn, should it be treated as an autonomous entity? This question has gained real-world urgency as AI systems increasingly mediate daily life, from healthcare diagnostics to financial decision-making. Some ethicists now seriously explore the concept of limited machine rights, an idea that can be traced directly back to Turing's willingness to ask whether intelligence, wherever it arises, might merit moral consideration. Turing also anticipated objections rooted in emotion and intuition, noting that humans might resist recognizing intelligence in machines out of discomfort or fear. His insistence on grounding the debate in evidence and performance rather than sentiment remains a valuable guide in contemporary AI ethics. The philosophical clarity of his work ensures that his voice still resonates in discussions that blend law, technology, and moral philosophy. In framing the problem so that future thinkers could grapple with it concretely, Turing gave us not just a test, but a method for reasoning about intelligence itself. A thematic mind map of Turing's life reveals a dense web of interconnections rather than a simple chronological line. His theoretical work on computation feeds directly into his wartime cryptography, which in turn accelerates his thinking on machine intelligence. His morphogenesis studies link biology with the mathematics of pattern, reinforcing his belief in universal principles underlying. For researchers, the map illustrates the origin points of entire subfields in computing, AI, and systems biology. For the public, it tells a human story of genius, adversity, and enduring influence. The mind map also underscores the long-term impact of his ideas. Concepts sketched in the 1930s and 1950s now animate technologies from search engines to genome sequencing. Understanding Turing's life as a network rather than a timeline highlights how breakthroughs often arise from cross-pollination between seemingly unrelated pursuits, a lesson as relevant to innovators today as it was in Turing's own time. Alan Turing's legacy is more than a list of achievements. It is a testament to the power of curiosity, rigor, and courage. He showed that the boundaries of the possible are often drawn by imagination as much as by technology. From the chalkboard sketches of the Turing machine to the clatter of codebreakers' machinery at Bletchley Park, from speculative essays on machine learning to equations describing the growth of living forms, his work shaped the intellectual landscape of the modern world. His life also stands as a warning. Innovation flourishes best in societies that value openness, diversity, and dissent. The recognition he has finally received, pardon, memorials, a place on the currency, cannot rewrite history, but it can inspire future generations to safeguard the conditions in which minds like his can thrive. In the age of artificial intelligence, when machines now learn and converse at scales he could only. In doing so, we honor not only Turing's memory, but his enduring challenge to think deeply, act justly, and never stop asking the questions that move the world forward. In the end, Alan Turing's life reminds us that the future is shaped not only by the answers we find, but by the courage to ask the questions no one else dares to pose. His work continues to ripple through every byte of code, every algorithm, every breakthrough that pushes the boundaries of what machines and humans can do. As long as we keep imagining boldly, thinking deeply, and standing for truth in the face of adversity, Turing's spirit will remain alive in the very fabric of progress. Turing's legacy extends beyond research laboratories and into the classrooms, lecture halls, and cultural institutions that shape how future generations think about science. In universities worldwide, his work is introduced early to computing students, not just as technical theory, but as a story of intellectual courage. The Turing machine is often the first formal model of computation they encounter, serving as both a historical anchor and a conceptual launchpad for more advanced topics. Schools use his story to illustrate the human dimensions of scientific progress, how personal integrity, creative problem-solving, and resilience in the face of adversity are as essential as technical skill. In popular culture, films like The Imitation Game and numerous documentaries have brought his story to a global audience, inspiring people who might otherwise never have heard of him. Art exhibitions, theater productions, and literature have used his life as a canvas for exploring broader themes of identity, morality, and the meaning of intelligence. The very act of narrating his story has become part of his impact, prompting public reflection on the intersection of science, ethics, and human rights. This cultural presence ensures that Turing is remembered not just as an abstract genius, but as a relatable figure whose struggles and triumphs speak to the universal human condition. By integrating his life and work into educational curricula and creative media, society reinforces the idea that innovation is not the result of isolated brilliance, but of a deeply human process, one that requires both freedom of thought and the moral courage to defend it. In today's era of deep learning and massive-scale computation, Turing's early insights feel remarkably prescient. Modern AI systems, built on architectures like neural networks and trained on colossal datasets, embody principles he recognized decades earlier. That intelligence is an emergent property arising from pattern recognition, adaptation, and iterative learning. While he lacked the computing power to test such systems in his own time, his theoretical framing still guides AI research. The Turing test, once a thought experiment, is now mirrored in real-world benchmarks for conversational agents and generative models. His suggestion that machines could learn from experience is foundational to reinforcement learning, where algorithms improve performance through feedback and trial and error, much as he envisioned with his chess-playing programs. In a sense, every self-improving algorithm carries a fragment of his vision forward. Moreover, his philosophical stance, that we should focus on what systems can do rather than endlessly debating what they are, remains a practical guide for both researchers and policymakers. As AI becomes more embedded in critical infrastructure, healthcare, and personal devices, the tension between capability and ethical responsibility becomes sharper, making Turing's integrated view of technical and moral inquiry more relevant than ever. His work serves as a reminder that technology must be developed with foresight and humility, anticipating not only its power to solve problems, but also its potential to amplify them. In bridging theory and application, Turing gave us the intellectual tools to navigate the current wave of AI transformation with both ambition and caution. Turing's enduring challenge to humanity is deceptively simple. Think beyond the limits imposed by current knowledge, but ground that thinking in rigorous logic and empirical testing. This dual demand, creative vision matched by disciplined proof, has become a model for scientific and technological innovation. His life illustrates that paradigm shifts often begin as improbable questions, dismissed by the mainstream until evidence and persistence force a reevaluation. In this way, his legacy functions as both inspiration and instruction manual. For innovators, it's a call to explore the unexplored. For educators, it's a lesson in fostering environments where unconventional ideas can thrive. For societies, it's a warning to protect those who dare to challenge the status quo. The mind map of his contributions, spanning computation, cryptography, biology, and philosophy, reminds us that breakthroughs often occur at the intersections between disciplines. Today's pressing challenges, from climate change modeling to quantum computing, require the same cross-boundary thinking that Turing embodied. And while his specific achievements belong to the 20th century, the mindset that produced them is timeless. In honoring his memory, we do more than preserve history. We recommit ourselves to the pursuit of knowledge unbounded by fear or prejudice. The most meaningful tribute to Turing is not merely to remember what he did, but to keep alive the fearless curiosity with which he approached every problem. In that sense, his life is less a closed chapter than an open invitation, a challenge waiting for each new generation to accept.